horse was the dominant form of human transportation for about 5,000 years. Domesticated Kazakhstan, 3000 BC.
That's Reed Hastings, the founder and CEO of Netflix. You might think he's giving an elevator pitch for a Netflix original, like Marco Polo, but without the blind Taoist monk. He's actually revealing the foundational strategy that drove the company's success. He starts the story on the plains of Kazakhstan and moves pretty quickly from there.
The horse was the dominant form of human transportation for about 5,000 years. Domesticated Kazakhstan, 3000 BC. So for 5,000 years, if you wanted to make a contribution of personal transportation, it was a better saddle, better breeding, better hooves. And then in one generation, from 1900 to 1930, everything changed with internal combustion engine.
What Reed Hastings understands with such clarity is that technological shifts don't always happen incrementally. Sometimes they burst over your head like a thunderclap and wipe away habits that have lasted thousands of years.
And the trick is to realize those are pretty rare.
So sometimes innovation happens fast. And that's the kind of change we typically aim for in Silicon Valley. But more often, innovation happens slowly. And Reed Hastings knew early on that Netflix needed both kinds of innovation. They started by sending DVDs in the mail and evolved into a streaming video service with original content.
And much of the time, the right strategy is to prove what you got. And then some of the time, everything changes. And correctly recognizing the differences there is really important. Humans are inventing faster and faster. And that does mean that the typical business model is shorter lived than it would have been before. So I'm not expecting internet streaming to be 5,000 years like the horse. But it may be like the automobile where it's 100 years or more.
Now that's the sort of foundational insight that not only drove Netflix strategy, but also defined their culture. Here's why. Reed could see he needed a team that could develop a first-rate logistics operation for shipping DVDs. And at some point, that same team would have to shed all of that logistical expertise and build an online streaming service from scratch. So who the heck can make that leap? Certainly not someone who's worked in a mailroom for 50 years and developed an expertise in shipping little red envelopes.
Ouch. Paper cut.
Reed knew he needed flexible problem solvers who could change with the times, and he built a company culture for and with them. It's a great example of why I believe there are many good company cultures and many bad company cultures. But a winning company culture emerges when every employee feels they personally own the culture.
You got to have incredible talent at every position.
It's like this huge push. There are fires burning when you're going home.
Can you believe it?
Such an idiot. And then you go back to, this is totally going to be amazing.
There are so many easy ways.
I'm supposed to know what to do. I have no idea what to do.
Sorry, we made a mistake.
But you have to time it right.
Oops. Working at a 3-bedroom apartment.
Stuff that just seems absolutely nutballs 10 years later. I was like, well, that's just how you do it.
We haven't made it.
Just how you do it.
This is Masters of Scale. I'm Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn, investor at Greylock, and your host. And I believe that a strong culture is critical to companies that hope to scale. But truly strong company cultures emerge only when every employee feels that they personally own the culture. And by strong culture, I don't mean authoritative. Quite the contrary. A strong culture should be a true articulation of how your employees work at their best. It should be grounded in your shared mission, the thing you're actually trying to accomplish. It should be understood by everyone and built by everyone. And it should start from your earliest days as a startup. But the question remains, how do you get everyone across the org to share your values without stifling diversity and hiring in your own image? And trickier still, how do you spread those values when you're hiring new employees by the hundreds? On today's episode, I'm going to talk with Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, about his journey from a dysfunctional culture in the first phase of his career to the high-performing culture he nurtures at Netflix. At times, you might find it a bit awkward that Reed Hastings and I have almost the same name.
Hi, Reed. Hi, Reed.
But we're going to push past that. As the episode continues, I'll simply refer to him as Reed. We're going to come to the Reed Hastings story in a moment, but I want to start at the beginning here. If you want to build a strong culture, the first thing you have to do is open your eyes. You have to start observing your culture the instant you arrive at the office, as soon as you walk through the front door. Margaret Heffernan, former CEO of 5 companies, can spot the warning signs in just a few paces from the front door to the front desk.
When you walk into a company, you instantly learn a huge amount.
And you're coming to see who? I'm in the middle of lunch. Just hold on.
There are all sorts of cliches and truisms about first impressions, but actually what you see when you walk in is almost always what you get when you get to know the company better.
So, as the world's lone expert on reception desks, I had to ask Margaret, what's the friendliest reception she's ever received?
I can think of a company in San Francisco that I've written about a lot called Method Home Care Products, where the founders and senior people in the company actually take turns being the receptionist.
Receptionist.
Because they want to know who's coming to see them.
At this remarkably welcoming company, the leadership team doesn't just hand their employees manuals on how to behave. Neither are they passive observers. They embody their cultural principles. I believe that a healthy culture emerges only when every employee, from the CEO to the receptionist, opts into the culture every day. The cultural principles themselves can change over time. They can vary from company to company, and they can strike outsiders as really bizarre. That's all fine. But the one thing must remain constant. Your staff must truly believe in your office culture. It's best to start thinking about this when your team is small and the culture is still malleable. A company's culture cements very quickly. So as you grow, you have to be very careful about what it is you're scaling. You can get away with a lot more when your staff is teeny, say 2 or 3 people. And that's exactly the sort of team Reed Hastings was leading back in 1991. Long before he founded Netflix, he was a programmer. Reed, along with 2 of his colleagues, invented a debugging tool for other programmers. They called it Purify, and it was a hit. That's when things got messy.
First round of funding was family and friends, 20 people by 20K, to be able to get an office and start selling. And then we doubled every year.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, in one way, tremendous. Morgan Stanley took us public in 1995. We acquired all these companies. But in another way, it was terrible because we got more and more bureaucratic, less and less inventive, less and less fun. And it was the classic company got soft and political as it got bigger.
Consider what Reed Hastings was up against. He was a programmer, not an experienced executive. He was acquiring companies, which means whole teams with their own hardened working habits were slapped together. At one point, his company, Pure Software, acquired 3 companies in the span of 18 months. And as the culture eroded, Reed had a solution of sorts.
I was coding all night, trying to be CEO in the day, and once in a while would squeeze in a shower. And it turns out that's not a good recipe for leading a large group of people. At the time, I thought if I could just do more sales call, more travel, write more code, do more interviews, that somehow it would work out better. I don't think I ever really escaped from that until the company got acquired by our largest competitor in 1997, 6 years after starting.
So Reed made a very typical mistake in his first company. He thought he could solve his company's problems just by working harder. But hard work isn't enough, and more work is never the real answer. To succeed as you scale, you have to leverage every person in the organization. And to do that, you have to be very intentional about how you craft the culture. This was exactly the lesson that Reed took from Pure Software.
Well, the mistakes in Pure was that every time we had a significant error, sales call didn't go well, bug in the code, we tried to think about it in terms of what process could we put in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again, and thereby improving the company. And what we failed to understand is by dummy-proofing all the systems, that we would have a system where only dummies wanted to work there, which was exactly what happened. And so the average intellectual level fell, and then the market changed, and we were unable to adapt to it because we had a bunch of people who valued